When last we left our adventurers, they had become aware of a massive, horrifying storm to the north in the city of Janwall, and through their contacts with the Lady Lightmane, the Lord of Holtberg, they had been sent, this burgeoning company known as the Exchange, in order to assist within the endeavor, rushed to the scene of this horrible disaster. Fortunately, the storm had dissipated, whatever it was, by the time they arrived, and they were able to help several people and try to, assist in both medical aid and finding those who had been injured or otherwise displaced by the storm. Apparently the storm was quite violent, all things considered, as, entire buildings had been uprooted and shattered. Debris was everywhere. The city itself was basically destroyed. They encountered while they were there an unusual Lord Elf. Some of them recognized him as a political and military figure from history, Radnall of Clan Highspring. He acted rather oddly around some of them and insisted at length with Guido that more was going on here, but for the most part, the party's efforts were fully concentrated on making sure that they could help save the lives of those present. Fortunately, miraculously, there were no casualties, but there were many wounded, and there was much that was damaged, and it would be months before Janwall was even in any livable condition whatsoever. However, fortunately, with the Exchange's help, and the political support from the Lord of the Holtberg province, the Lady Lightmane earlier mentioned, surely the town would rise again. With great fortune, there were several Order airships within the area that were assisting within the recovery of the town, and were able to add a great deal of medical assistance, and with the summoners' aspects going into places humans couldn't reach or otherwise access in order to make sure they could get everyone out. So, all things considered, the town was doing better than it otherwise should have. Meanwhile, Snarg, uncertain what was wrong with Firnasil, had rushed off with Zeiss in a fast-travel, three-person airship on loan from Archon Transport Systems, thanks to the assistance of the Order, of course. The Order, it seems, believed whatever had happened with Firnasil, her illness could be spared if she came into direct contact with the ley line, and as such, they decided that the Light Temple was the nearest possibility. On the way, Zeiss was reading his journal and found it contradicted some recent events, but otherwise it seemed perfectly normal. Fortunately, Snarg was able to get Firnasil to the head of the line at the temple and have her inserted into the loci, but she did not exit immediately as all should. That's very unusual. After a few minutes of watching and waiting, during which local Order personnel were already worried and attempting to discern the problem, Snarg fell to his feet for no reasonable reason, and rose, shivering, uncertain as what was going on, as some kind of mental contact was hit him in the brain and informed him that, no worries, he had fixed her now. And Snarg found a letter in his coat pocket. Due to the unusual nature of these events, Firnasil on the way back decided to go ahead and mentally link her mind with Snarg's, and in so doing, he realized that there was something more going on than it seemed. From Firnasil, Snarg learned that some hours prior he had actually mentally dumped his memory of most recent events into her mind, and discovered they were wildly different from what he remembered from the events that had just occurred. Apparently what had actually happened is, in those final moments of the violent storm, he had been looking at Firnasil and analyzed her, and in so doing he had seen something unusual. He had found that her soul was visible, and while he was watching, a shard of it was cut loose and fell to the ground. At that exact moment is when the storm stopped. Just like that, dead still, and people and debris and things that were in the air at that exact moment were sent flying. Lots of damage. Many, many, many people were dead. Snarg went to procure the shard to figure out what the hell was going on, but found that no one else could see or even sense the fact that the shard was there, and he wasn't sure what to make of this. Two things happened in short order after this. First, he looked up to realize that the Leviathan was there. Let me explain a little bit so you understand the significance of this. Within the airships of this world, there are generally 4 grades, and within that certain classifications, okay? There's civilian grade, economic grade, wait, hang on, I'm missing a step. No, that's right. Okay, I'm sorry. There's 3 grades, excuse me, and multiple classifications. There is civilian grade, there is mercantile grade, or merchant grade, or whatever you want to call it, commercial, and then there is military grade. In general, even the best commercial airship is generally going to be considered worse in terms of production value, in terms of its sophistication, in terms of its capabilities, than the very worst possible military grade vessel. Make sense? Within the military grades, there are fighters, which are basically uniquely used by the Lugians for reasons I don't want to go into because it has to do with their culture and their society and everything that has to do with their everyday life. There's corvettes, which are larger than that, usually have a crew of, say, a dozen or 2 individuals, still fairly decent things. There are destroyers. Destroyers are generally the mainstay of any given fleet. That's the vast bulk of the ships you're going to see in a military fleet. And then there's the big boys, the frigates. Generally, a frigate is a huge deal. If you attach a frigate to an area, you are doing a monumental thing, and there's only a handful of frigates in the world. And then there's 1 grade on top of that, or 1 class, excuse me, on top of that, and that is dreadnought. As far as the world is aware, there is only 1 dreadnought in active service, and that is the Leviathan herself. The dreadnought is several miles long, incredibly powerful, ridiculously difficult, and expensive and costly to maintain, and the Leviathan herself is an Alluvian warship. So a little bit of backstory on that. Now, the interesting thing about this is nobody actually noticed when the Leviathan showed up. It was just there, which bothered several of the party members on the face of it. However, very shortly thereafter, the Leviathan just left for seemingly no reason, heading southward, if it matters. Very shortly thereafter, the party started running around trying to save as many people as they could. However, as I mentioned before, a lot of the people here were dead. Now, all of these memories I'm sharing with you now are from Snarg's perspective, because he's the only one who managed this. I'll get to the details of what happened in a moment. But as he was running around, he realized he needed to take care of Firnasil, and so he started asking several of the people who had been, several of the local officials, what can we do to assist? What can we do to help? And they found out that Snarg was one of the people at the quote-unquote epicenter. So they took Snarg and Firnasil and Zeiss and ferried them off to a large, kind of a cubicle-shaped airship, which was known to be an order airship. On board, they were briefed by someone who claimed to be a member of the second wing of the order. Again, for those of you who have forgotten, the first wing deals with the elements, the summoners, the aspects, and all such things. The second wing deals with aid, economic aid, medical aid, technology advancement, general assistance to the world type thing, goodwill missions and that forth. And of course, the third wing is the military wing. So she claimed to be from the second wing, and she represented a very specific and elite group within the second wing called the Pinnacle. Now, if that doesn't mean anything to you guys, that's okay, but I live for moments like this when I'm GMing, and when I drop a bombshell into the middle of a campaign, and when the players react. It always kind of disappoints me when I drop a bombshell and nobody reacts, but when I do so and the players are like, or oh my god, or just something, I'm like, yes, that's just so satisfying to me. For those of you who do not remember, the Pinnacle is known by the party to be the organization behind the capture and seeming torture and killing of Kazrinthka, of Worker, the Ulthoi of earlier. They are the ones who ended up destroying all of the summoners 14 years ago, and in some kind of wild experiment. They're also known to have agents and influences everywhere. They're generally considered to be one of the primary villains of the group. So the party doesn't exactly know what to do with this, and Snarg and Zeiss, their Firnasil's unconscious, by the way. Snarg still has her soul sliver with him. Snarg and Zeiss have no idea what to do with this. They try talking with their way out, fails. They try thinking about fighting their way out, that's abandoned very quickly. Finally, they realize that there's nothing they can do about this situation, and the woman informs them very kindly not to worry, their memories will be erased anyways. And she basically refuses to reveal any information to the two of them on the grounds that it would be pointless to do so because they'll forget about it. Which is actually a rather appropriate thing if you think about it. And she informs them in no uncertain terms that their memories will be wiped and replaced with new ones. Which probably makes the beginning of this video make a little bit more sense. However, the reason the party knows any of this is Snarg decided to do something very smart. Because Fiornaciel was already unconscious, there was no need to memory wipe her because she had no memory of what happened. And so given that, they left her alone, and Snarg mind-linked with her, even though she was unconscious, and basically did a data dump of all his memories into her brain. And that's how they know any of this stuff happened. Now, it is all from Snark's perspective, so they don't know everything and all the details and whatnot, but at least they were able to retain something of what actually happened. Shortly thereafter, the Order personnel actually, the ship that they were in settled down. They got several people working out, and the reason for the mind wipe was revealed. These Order mages are white mages of the highest order, and they know the Phoenix spell. Now, I know that doesn't mean anything to a lot of you, but several of my party members, as soon as they realized what was going on, were like, they're using Phoenix! Oh my god! Which was another awesome moment for me. Phoenix is one of the ultimate white magic spells. In general, you have to be level 12 or higher to even learn any ultimate spells, and only white mages can learn the whites, only blacks can learn the black, and only yellows can learn the yellows. In other words, if you're a multi-class thing, like a red mage or whatever, you can't actually learn any ultimate spells. And you don't learn them automatically. There's something involved, and I've never given details because it hasn't really come up yet, but there's something involved you have to go through in order to earn an ultimate spell. What Phoenix does is it is the one and only resurrection spell in the entire setting. It is the only way to bring someone back from the dead, at least as far as everyone was aware. Anything else, like the life spell that exists earlier, that actually only brings you back from downed status. If you die, that's it, unless you have Phoenix. Now, as I mentioned in my documents, for anybody who actually read them, the Phoenix spell is a highly contained and protected resource because of how much a resurrection spell would so drastically alter the nature of politics and power and resources and infighting and all that horrible stuff. So it's long considered a protected resource. This is the first time I've been able to show the party, and indeed you, the viewers, one of the ways it is protected. This whole order ship and this whole special order, this whole sect of the order, specifically goes around mind-wiping people so they can resurrect them, and then ensure that nobody knows that that's what they happened. Hence the no losses, no dead within the area. Because they resurrect everyone, every single life that was lost within the disaster of Janwall. So that catches you up to speed, and then all the things I mentioned earlier do actually happen with regards to them flying off to, to save Fiornaciel and all that fun stuff. While they come back, Snarg reveals to the rest of the group via the mind link what actually happened, and basically they realize they have a few choices to do. Now, none of the party likes the idea of the fact that their memories were tinkered around with so blatantly, and all of them want to do something about it, but they all agree simply going and fighting the Order, especially given what the Order just did, would be tantamount to suicide. So instead, they start debating, okay, let's start thinking about the exchange. Because that's what we were here to begin with. We're here to advance the means of the exchange in order to improve our power base. While they were doing that, Radnall wandered back over to the group, and they started talking with him again now that they knew that he was telling the truth. For whatever reason, he had been immune to the effects of the mind wipe. They never actually followed up on that. He was very openly evasive. However, he admitted to the group, as they were talking politics, that while his people were technically a bloc, BLOC, by the way, which refers to the organizations that were made from the dying remnants of the assassinated undermarket, and he was technically a warlord, he had no real interest in the politics or the money or the power. All he really wanted to do was take care of his people because he believed rather strongly that the Illuvian leadership was failing miserably in doing that. And kind of provably so. So, given that, the group decided they would go ahead and take his... They arranged a deal. They'll take his territory under their wing, as long as they promise to take care of the people within it, and they'll go ahead and take care of the slates problem nearby and solidify that, in order to go ahead and make sure that there's this sort of mutually beneficial arrangement where Radnall gets what he wants, the people get what they want, and the party gets access to more resources and more political power and more money. So, that being said, they go ahead and decide to go ahead and get whatever info they can on the slates, because they do know that there is an occupation force in the nearby town of Irondale. And they know two big important things about that. One, several of those forces are armed with granite weapons, which is a pretty strong weaponry, all things considered, at least as far as the norm goes. And two, that they were believed to have a fell knight amongst their ranks. And almost all of the discussion amongst the party was how they were going to deal with this fell knight and whether or not it was their Moorsman fell knight from earlier. Now, during the night, Zeiss decided to basically abandon the party and headed back towards Hultberg. He decided to go ahead and try to work with the individuals back there, tried to get his manipulations going on. He was doing his own thing back at Hultberg. We'll just skip over most of that. Most of the people decided to get a good night's sleep after the horrendous events of the day, with one exception, and I liked this. Guido decided to make a point of visiting the refugees in the area, the refugees from the Stonehold region, and managed to recruit several of them into a fighting force to take Irondale under the precept that they would be able to settle within the Irondale region. In other words, they would have an actual home rather than tents or bushes and branches out in the wild, right? So that was considered to be a mutually beneficial arrangement as well. As it happens, Guido ended up getting a lot more people than he expected. It was in the hundreds, actually. So, a little bit more than he was expecting. It's actually kind of funny because the Illuvian military had not actually reached this group yet, and had they done so, the Illuvian military would have basically extended the same offer. So the only reason Guido succeeded at this is because he got the jump on it, so to speak. One other point of import, as I look at my notes here, and this is actually really important. The party has actually never figured out what was going on with this. Even though they rested the night, all of their mana was at 0. All of them, the whole party. And not a single party member, some of the people who hadn't even used their mana was at 0, and the rest of the party members who woke up from the middle, the next day, on the 26th of February, their mana was still at 0, even though it shouldn't be. Meanwhile, back in Hultberg, Zeiss had linked back up with Coulson, who, if you'll remember, was back there, and Rikarg, who was also there, and they exchanged information. Zeiss didn't actually learn much, although they did learn that Rikarg had decided to dub the incident a Mana Storm. He didn't elaborate on what that meant, and the two actually didn't know what that meant, but at least they had a title for the incident. 2 letters had arrived from the previous evening, one for Coulson from his sister, which went on about several things, but mentioned oddly that she could not find the Skyclaw, despite knowing exactly where it was. She'd been given a bit of a tour by the party before she left. And there was one letter for Snarg that was penned by Slavina of Dragonflayer from way back in the first adventure, detailing that the fact that despite Snarg's entreaties, she of the Dragonflayer clan and the Wildpal tribe had both reached a consensus to not abandon the defenseless they had so recently sworn to protect in exchange for their own safety and convenience, as they could not take such an action on moral grounds. So they were going to stay and help fight on the Nevere side of the war between Nevere and Alluvia. By about 5 in the morning, most of the party had awoken, and Zeiss, Coulson, and Rikarg had made their way back to the debris field that is now Janwal. The group learned, to their surprise, I already mentioned this. Well, apparently it was 500, according to my notes here. Sorry, I'm kind of reading my notes, because I took really detailed notes for this section. I want to get as many details across as I can. I hope you'll forgive me for that. But almost 500 people were there in this sort of makeshift army that they got. Firnesil very quickly took the mantle of the colonel of this army and began coordinating into platoons and squads, most of which the GM did, and it was a lot of fun. I actually have, if you'll forgive me for sidelining a moment, because I always mention, I'm actually going to go grab it. I always mention kind of the process of GMing in addition to just telling you guys the story, and so I feel like this is something that would be awesome to share right about now. This is probably one of the best purchases I've ever made as far as GMing goes. You don't need to see what's on it. There's something on there. Anyways, it's it's a whiteboard, right? And it's a magnetic whiteboard. See, I got magnets right here that I can go ahead and write on there, and got a little pen, got a little eraser on it. It's beautiful. I can do so many things with this, and this is such a wonderful tool. I mean, obviously, I kind of like the tile mat, and I like the idea of using actual miniatures. I don't know why, I just do. I'm sure a lot of people are in that same boat. By the way, pro tip, if you're having trouble purchasing miniatures because they're ludicrously expensive, Legos. Seriously, little Lego men, you sit them down so their feet are up like this, and you can decorate, because they're Legos, you can mix and match and use different things, so it's really easy to distinguish them, and then that can be your party member icons on the grid. Pro tip. Anyways, so I could do all sorts of stuff with this. I could scribble out, I could do a design, I could give them like a little map of the area. It's a very wonderful visual tool, and because of the magnets thing, I can actually have the magnets be, okay, this is here, and now you're moving over here, and they're moving over here. And when I was doing this whole section, which I actually am not at yet, but we'll get there. When I actually do the battle that happens between the two forces of like 500 and 1,000, I was doing it all on this board. I was kind of summarizing the events to the party, but I wasn't other than a few things. I was mostly doing all of the I guess the computer work is what you'd call this, the work that the game would be doing here on this board. And so I just thought I'd share that, because I thought it was cool. It was actually a lot of fun. So, put that away. Well, if I put it away, I mean drop it on the floor, and I'll put it away later. So, as they were heading out there, Snarg, Zeiss, and Hagaide decided to take vanguard scouting positions. By the way, you'll notice I haven't actually said what happened with Hagaide yet. That's partially because the party doesn't actually know what happened with Hagaide, because the only memories they have are from Snarg's perspective. Suffice it to say, something did happen with him. Moving on. So they headed on, and Snarg, Zeiss, and Hagaide were taking the vanguard scout positions, and Snarg managed to spot something. He took some caution, a little bit too much caution actually, ended up missing his chance, but he found an incredibly crude trap, which Zeiss took and gave to Hagaide as a souvenir. And they ended up chasing after a dwarf scout. Now, Snarg managed to leap attack her, and though he had some difficulties, she was equipped with a granite longsword, which left him rather injured, and he, in response, actually beheaded her, killing her. This is probably the first time that it's become apparent that Snarg is acting a little oddly, and I'm just going to mention this to you because obviously you don't catch the role-playing aspects, but Snarg was behaving very strangely, especially for Snarg. This troubled Firnesil so greatly that she actually ordered him to link up with the rest of the gnolls instead of remaining on scout duty, and it actually led to an argument which ended up basically just being cut off by the rest of the party butting in and saying, okay, stop, stop, and the two just kind of skulked off. It was about midday on February the 26th when the army arrived in the southeast section of Irondale. Again, I had a little visual reference here. And it was in a plain leading out to the outskirts of the city here. Firnesil, Hagaide, and Javan decided to go forward as a treaty party, hoping to bluster their way into a bloodless victory. The Slates sent out an extremely heavily armored dwarf that the party assumed was their Fell Knight, and two robed individuals who appeared unarmed. The negotiations went incredibly poorly. I actually asked a few of the one of the party members to role play as Firnesil rather than arguing with myself. I don't like playing someone arguing with myself unless I have to. So that went really, really, really badly. There were a lot of insults, and finally the dwarf decided to go ahead and just attack. The Battle of Irondale started really, really badly for the exchange. The two escorts were apparently some kind of assassin specialist class, and they had some very unusual-looking hook blades that were debilitating to anyone they actually struck, and they were far more dexterous than simple aids should have been. The knight himself was a dwarf known as Paxton of Shadowforge. He wielded a massive granite claymore with brutal efficiency, and he actually brought Firnesil to downed in one hit. Similarly, with only 3 troops in the field, the Slates had no problem loosing their arrows and artillery on the other group, whereas they were very hesitant to do so in return. Fortunately, at a great deal of effort and some good dice rolls, the party was able to down and then kill the 2 aides and finally behead the knight, who obviously they assumed the Fell Knight, even though he never actually used any Fell Knight powers. He was clearly stronger than some mere soldier. Woo! Firnesil at this point revealed another of her new abilities. She knelt to the ground and started channeling for 4 rounds, encasing all present in these spikes of ice that kind of formed up around them, which you may think is a little weird. This is around friendly party members, mind you, and several wounded soldiers. But when the ice melted, all of those, they were healed for a huge amount, and anybody who had been encased who was downed was brought back up to standing. Now, this basically pulled her out of the fight as she went into support for 4 rounds, which is a pretty long time, all things considered. But it negated a huge amount of damage that the enemy side was doing. With the 3 elite troops down, most of the party members kind of linked up with platoons and started acting as coordinating, leading their men, which gave them huge bonuses to their, stacking leadership bonus. Anybody who's played any actual, Warhammer style tabletop turn-based game knows what I'm talking about in general. And long story short, the battle very quickly became a rout. Hang on just a second. Hang on just a second. I kind of lost my place here. Here we go. So, what they ended up doing was they brought when I say a rout, I'm sorry, I actually kind of skipped ahead a bit, because what was actually happening was the exchange was losing because the slates outnumbered the exchange almost 3-1. And I want to stress something, because this is actually really important for something in the future. With very few exceptions, nobody was killing anybody on the other side. If somebody was injured enough to no longer be in fighting capacity, they were left alone. Now, this is actually fairly normal for this setting, by the Articles of Warfare and the general pseudo-civilized nature of the way these people work. It's not considered normal to kill on the battlefield. I know that sounds weird, but that's the way they think. So in general, there are very few losses, other than the 3 people the party went out of their way to kill, of course, because the party just says screw all that, but you get my point. The armies weren't actually killing each other over the most part. So, what ended up happening is Firnasil herself, even though she really didn't want to do this, ended up bringing a large portion of the civilians they had up in order to reinforce their numbers. Now, I call them civilians because of those 500, a much smaller number actually had fighting experience and weapons. Almost none of them had armor. These civilians are exactly that. They're just refugees. They're just people with whatever they've got handy, and which is basically nothing in the most part. However, having that numbers and Snarg, who was supporting his Gnoll platoon, there was a whole platoon of just Gnolls, they actually managed to do something of a fighting withdrawal and pull back to a position of defense, so that they were able to start harrying the enemy forces as they were coming across, because there was this huge plain in between, right? And as they were pushing forward, their bubble was being distended, and they were getting to the point where they're actually buildings, and the slates had reinforced those buildings, so they were just getting slaughtered up there. Having done this, Snarg had realized the true strength of his Gnoll platoon, because Gnolls are slightly faster than most other races, and they have a lot more health. That's basically their racial benefit, is they get additional hit dice. So he began using them as a form of light cavalry, and he began actually skirmishing against the Dwarven numbers which were trying to flank them. That proved extremely effective, tactically speaking. The entire time, Ricard was actually midway back, also casting a near-continuous stream of buffs on as many exchange soldiers as he could. Don't forget, Ricard is a very high-level yellow mage. As the battle finally started turning their way, Hegaide, Guido, Rory, Zeiss, and Javan had all charged headlong into the enemy town. They basically pierced the enemy lines, and they were trying to find any kind of leadership or coordination in order to cut off the head and assist in their process here. They found a single Dwarven leader, who apparently was the guy coordinating. However, he was completely by himself without even a single guard, and most of the group didn't even realize until way too late that it was a trap. The dwarf actually cast a huge spell, a flame spell, that they didn't even recognize, actually, and managed to level the entire group within a single blow. At this point, the slates sounded out a general alarm, which everyone recognizes your standard stand down battle horn, and the forces quickly disengaged. Firnasil, Coulson, and Snarg, who are left over here on the battlefield, quickly convened to discuss their options and wonder where the hell their other comrades are. The slates sent out support personnel who are gathering wounded and the occasional dead in the field, theirs and the exchanges both, it's worth noting, in order to be treated, and a platoon of dwarves and one very well-dressed dwarf with shocking white hair and finery that bespoke wealth, and he had a very unusual skin condition. It was similar to what they'd seen on the earlier dwarf, the Fell Knight that they'd fought. He approached the trio with a wagon. Inside the wagon were the unconscious bodies of the rest of the members of the party. Very unusual circumstances, but wary of what was going to happen, the party, such as it is, Firnasil and Coulson, basically both decided to approach, and they told Snarg, the only remaining party member left behind at this point, to take command of the group if this was a trap, and basically just get the hell out if Firnasil and Coulson were going to die in this parley. The dwarf, who went out of his way to never name himself, attempted pleasantries, but Coulson just basically spit in their face the whole time, and finally he said, "All right, if you will leave and forfeit your victory over this land, or I will kill your comrades right now." Now, the funny thing is, I actually figured this would be just a little bit of a decision point for Snarg and Coulson, who are basically the only players playing at this point, or active at this point, I should say. So they did a bit of a mental mind link real quick to determine what their consensus was, but all three of them agreed, absolutely. There was nothing they could do in order to claim this at the cost of their friends' lives. So the answer was, no, we're going to... We give up. You win. Don't kill our friends. For whatever reason, that actually really seemed to satisfy the dwarf, and so he went ahead and healed up several of the party members he had just knocked out to 1 health, just barely enough to get out of the wagon. And as they were preparing to withdraw from the battlefield, not certain what to make of their loss, Greta showed up. Now, for those of you who do not remember, Greta of Firebeard is the warlord of the Slates block. The party has actually encountered her sometime before in her town, whose name I actually don't remember off the top of my head. I'll look it up while I talk here. And they were very confused because she seemed really pleased. Her attitude, her atmosphere, everything about her was just like, yeah, this is great. Rithholm. She is from Rithholm, and that's the town she had, and obviously she'd claimed Irondale. She was extremely happy with the way the events had gone, and she accepted the surrender and hoped she was grateful the exchange was now going to accept her surrender, and she was very hopeful that the transition would be a smooth one. And the way she talked, the party was just kind of like, they had no idea what to make of this. And she offered the victorious exchange forces to rest and recoup within Irondale. The party immediately took that as a trap and decided to go ahead and decline. However, she went ahead and offered to speak privately with the exchange leadership, which ended up being Firnasil, Guido, and Coulson in this case. Once within a private house, Greta revealed her relief that the situation turned out as well as it did, and the exchange had decided to uphold its side of the bargain, and she would now honor hers. She would go ahead and take the slates, fold them into the exchange in terms of territory, forces, and resources, and she would remain a provincial leader of some significance within the growing exchange criminal empire. The party had no idea what she was talking about, so if you don't either, don't worry. After some discussion and some really careful diplomacy and deception rules, the party found out that Greta had actually been in direct contact with Bonebreaker back in Holtberg for over a week now. And they learned, roughly, that the general plan had been they would do basically a faux battle between the two forces under specific circumstances. The Slates would claim Irondale, which would push Radnall out of it, which would push him into a situation where he would have to accept the leadership of one group or the other. Sorry about that. Sneeze attack. The idea was to push Radnall, because of how generally easily manipulatable he was, into a position where he would accept the leadership of either the Slates or the Exchange, whichever force won out, and they would have this battle to see who would actually prove the superior force, and then upon victory, whichever force actually won would then be tested to see if they were capable of showing mercy, and therefore, basically being a kind of force the other side would want to work for. The Exchange lost, but they were able to put on a tremendous fight, and were I shouldn't even say they lost, because the battle was still going on, but for all intents and purposes, from the Slate's perspective, the Exchange had won, and then were willing to show mercy by being willing to withdraw without killing, their own people. So that was sufficient to satisfy the terms of the bargain in Greta's mind. The idea here, and I really want to get this across because this is kind of important, Bonebreaker had arranged this entire situation with her to expand the Exchange's or the Slate's power. It didn't really matter, because one way or another, he and she would both be well positioned to be strong leaders within the new conglomerate organization, which would also include the runners from Radnall's group, and they would have access to more resources, more people, more territory, and of course, it would be a relatively bloodless coup. All of this was very well organized and very well set up, and for some reason, and I gotta mention this because this is something I never actually understood, me personally, the GM. Many of the party members took this as a violent and horrible betrayal of the party by Bonebreaker, and were really, really pissed off at him and really wanted to go and just kill him, basically, was the big thing they were all talking about. We got to go back and kill Bonebreaker. And it took a lot of discussion to get to the point where, okay, we'll talk to Bonebreaker first, but then we kill him, you know. Never quite got that. Maybe in the comments section, several of the party members can tell you why they felt that way, because I don't actually understand. But let's go ahead and move on. So, in passing, Greta mentioned, as she was talking to the group, that apparently this kind of consolidation of the pieces of the undermarket was actually becoming very, very commonplace. It was happening very rapidly across the continent as town-sided blocks were quickly negotiating or conquering other blocks to get larger pieces of what had been the undermarket before it had been assassinated. She also specifically mentioned the Nevere Raiders by name. It was a huge block that had basically claimed the entire Yerek state in the Nevere Confederacy for its own. That hasn't, that's just some foreshadowing and some background information, setting information. Guido made certain that Greta intended to uphold his bargain with the refugees, because Guido's bargain with the refugees had been, you help us in this fight, we get you homes. Greta herself had absolutely no problems with this, especially since she herself was basically going to be in charge of these towns, you know, the de facto local, you know, mafia boss, or whatever you want to call it. And she thought it would be great, a great concept, because these people would have home and hearth and food and all that fun stuff, and they would be willing to work for her and for the exchange as a whole in response to this. So, and she also was willing to offer this deal to other refugees within the area, because don't forget, refugees are basically everywhere in Alluvia right now. They are swarming it, and the Alluvian military is trying to snag them up as quickly as it can. So she wants to go ahead and grab as many of those as quickly as she is capable of doing. The next day, they decided to go ahead and sleep at the inn. However, the previous night, Zeiss, well, long story short, hang on. Well, there was a couple other details. Most of it was just role-playing. Snarg and Zeiss had a little bit of a thing where they were trying to figure out if anybody had sent out messengers, trying to figure out what was going on with the letters, that kind of a thing. Snarg was debating going ahead and leaving the party for a brief period because of what was going on with his people, you know, now that he'd gotten the letter about that Zeiss had earlier. They questioned Greta about the unusual skin of the two dwarves they'd encountered. She didn't know anything, or was lying about it. One of the two. They never really found out. That being said, they decided to go ahead and head back to Genwall, which is where Snark had headed off by himself in kind of a fit of just frustration. Snark had also wanted to try and assist in the reclamation efforts of Genwall. When they got there, this is now February 27th, I think I'm going to keep going, we're only at 34 minutes. When they got there, they found that Snarg had been basically exhausted. He was actually asleep when they showed up. However, they decided to go ahead and head out right away towards Marblebush, which, if you're paying attention to the map, I know you haven't seen the map, but like, Genwall's here, Irondale's here, Marblebush is up here, so they went from Genwall to here, and then back, and then up here like this. And actually, I think I might save this next section. I don't know, should I cliffhanger this or not? What do you guys think? I'll give you 3 seconds to talk to your camera, or to your monitor, rather. Cliffhanger it is, okay. So, when they got to Marblebush, they were pretty damn tired since they hadn't actually slept properly for some time, and it was a long trip. They arrived pretty much the evening of February 27th. By the time they got there, however, they found out that the rooms in the few inns that are present in the town were basically booked to capacity, so instead they decided to look around for either Coulson's sister and to check out the quarry. Now, Zeiss decided to go ahead and scout his way out to the quarry by himself. However, he encountered a very large blockade of people in green uniforms of a make he didn't quite recognize surrounding the area, with a huge amount of makeshift tents and whatnot. They automatically assumed, for obvious reasons, that that was the order business, and they decided to go ahead and retreat. Meanwhile, back in town, they had in fact found the inn that Tia had been staying at, the Artemis Feedhole, and they inquired after Tia. Now, the innkeeper recognized Coulson. He'd actually rented the inn for Tia in the first place. Tia is Coulson's sister, for those of you who have forgotten. And they go ahead and let him in, and they decided to go ahead and basically sleep the night in the one room that was available, which was Tia's inn. They also found a huge array of notes she'd been collecting, comments on the nature of psionic thought process, observations about a potential servant or slave caste based on the room decorations and the architecture, so forth and so on. I actually went quite a bit into detail about how someone would... It was actually kind of fun to kind of take something I know and then have someone else look at, base architecture and from an archaeological perspective and try to guess at it. So stuff like that. She also mentioned, and this is the second time I've mentioned this, that she was not able to locate the airship despite her best efforts, and she suspected something was messing with her mind because her sense of direction wasn't that bad, and Coulson was able to back this up. She had a pretty good head for navigation. However, they went ahead and decided to go ahead and cram in there, got a little bit of a night's rest. This now leads us to the next day, and awoke after a pretty bad night's rest to find that there were this is actually a day's rest, excuse me, this is still the 27th. There were a large number of green uniformed people who were collecting in the tavern below that evening. Snarg tried to get them to react to him going down to get to breakfast, which resulted in nothing. Zeiss tried to question them, which got some mixed results. They told him they were part of an archaeological company that handled special situations like this, and that they were definitely not a part of the order. Snarg had an idea to go ahead and hit the local laundromat and get some of their uniforms to try and sneak his way in. Unfortunately, he was almost immediately stopped, failing at lying, failing at bluffing, and was basically taken out as some kind of traitor or agent or whatever. Before things could have gotten even worse for the situation, and a fight would have broken out in the middle of town with people who they didn't even know who they were, an unviolent elven woman he did not recognize approached, provided official papers, and insisted Snarg was with her. As her story checked out, the uniformed agents went ahead and departed, and she very irritably led the group northwards towards the quarry. Along the way, Zeiss was able to divine her true identity due to her sharing it via irrefutable proof. This woman was in fact Z, who the party has not seen for some time, if you'll recall, although she was obviously in another one of her disguises because she looked completely different than she had before. Z was able to provide proper papers to enter the ruins through the unusual Order agents, and yes, they were actually Order agents. There was a warning that if anything happened wrong, it would be on her head and her reputation's head. For whatever reason, the Order and whoever was actually in the ruins were taking security on this extremely seriously, and the idea of letting people in, even if they have proper identification, was very uneasy to them. Once they got in there, they figured out the real reasons why this place had been under such a lockdown. The Olthoi had come in. Apparently, Z... Z was not actually the only one, but Z had gone with their Fell Knight Moorsman friend from earlier, Scargill, in order to go contact the Olthoi and inform them about the airship, about the Skyclaw, the psionic airship. Both of them had believed, for basically the same reasons, the only group in all the world that could be trusted with something like this were the Olthoi. Now, the Olthoi had basically set themselves up in here. There was heat, magicite devices. It was very livable. They had resources, food, medical supplies, that kind of thing. It was basically being lived in by the Olthoi at the moment. And the place was pretty much entirely populated by Olthoi, with two notable exceptions. They found Tia there, no surprise, and they found Zippar, which was the Charmander that, or was it a Charmeleon? I actually don't remember. I think it was just a Charmander that was Snarg's pet. The group convened and shared some info between themselves, which is basically everything I've already summarized for you. However, two very horrifying-looking red-chittened Olthoi that were obviously Olthoi, but looked very different in physical form than what any other group had encountered before. They had, instead of the usual 4 arms, well, more like 2 arms and then 2 hook blades, they had the usual hook blades on their back, and then they had 4 arms, and then another pair of bladed arms underneath that, and they had a very different look and feel to them. Regardless, they sniffed at the group at length, examining them before they determined they were safe enough to bring the charge they were protecting, because they were bodyguards for a very special individual, Kizrinthka. Now, this is another one of those oh my god moments that worked out pretty well when I was GMing. But Kizrinthka of Worker, the former party member, was like, "Hey, party members!" And it was really funny because Snarg immediately leapt at her enjoy. But he immediately stopped himself because one of the giant red Doom Olthoi immediately put several claws in the way, ready to stop him. However, Kazrinthika herself actually then shoved the claws out of the way and jumped onto Snarg and Rory both, managed to grab both of them and tackled them into a glomp. She was very excited to see the party again, and the party shared a lot of info amongst themselves and learned what had happened to the now missing party members, and she shared about what happened to her. She shared about her apparent death. She shared that he had woken up an unknown amount of time later in a hospital being tended to by an Olthoi soldier, who apparently vanished immediately thereafter, and she had been confined to Central for her own safety. Central is the Olthoi territory. Some days ago, she had been visited by Z and the Moorsman I mentioned earlier, Scargill of Pallidtone. Both of them had informed her, and through her the Olthoi in general, about the Skyclaw. Scargill had apparently escorted them here and left not even a day ago. He headed towards the Light Temple on other business. After some discussion, two things came to the attention of the Red Olthoi that were observing all this. That Hagaide had been in Visayan Lacel, which was under Tumarok control, and that Fir Nasil was a scion. As a result of these actions, they found out that the Olthoi were actually basically immune to the mental powers and communications of the scions. It's actually kind of weird because a scion can mentally try to send thoughts to an Olthoi, but they cannot receive them. And it's kind of a strange little situation, and they can't, obviously, because they can't receive anything, they could not control an Olthoi in any way, shape, or form. The Red Olthoi decided to go ahead and ask Hagaide about his experiences on with the Tumarok in great detail, while another Olthoi of Black Chitin, which was another type the group had never encountered before, arrived and took Fir Nasil with him, believing she could be the answer they were searching for. He actually, Rikarg went with her, by the way, just as a side note. Rikarg will become a slightly more important party member soon. That's why I kind of keep mentioning where he is at these moments. The party went on something of a bit of a tour next, and decided to go ahead and see if they could see what they could find, and they found a purple chitined Olthoi, this is yet another type they've never seen before, which identified itself as of the noble brood. The Olthoi noble answered several of the party questions, and from him they learned a few facts. For example, the Olthoi at the very least had been around at the time of the Scions. They found out that the Scions had tried and failed to conquer the Olthoi, as they had all the other races. They also learned that the Olthoi were aware of the shadows, but they don't know anything about them. They also learned from this individual that the Olthoi had learned from the Scions that the Scions had determined a very volatile, horrible last-ditch plan to deal with the shadows. The plan had to do with basically self-destructing all of the ley lines across the world, which would basically destroy the world itself. And they knew that the only way that this would be capable is if they used psionic souls to be fused into the ley line and then access them in order to self-destruct the planet. The Olthoi's belief is this is very much related to the shockwaves that's been happening lately. After a bit, they returned to their room and found that their captor, who was a Olthoi soldier, was also something of a chef. And I actually spent like 20 minutes in real time describing the food and all the drink they got. Forgive me for not writing down all the notes. I really should have. It was really good. I went way overboard in describing the fine cuisine they got to enjoy. But as that was happening, they felt some strange rumbling, and they learned that the Skyclaw was actually taking off. Apparently, the only thing that had been preventing the Olthoi from taking the Skyclaw and actually using it was a scion, which was needed to bypass certain safeties within the ship. And now that it was up and in the air, they also learned that the Skyclaw was probably going to be gone for some time, and Kazrinthka was also on board. Rikarg was on board, of course, and so was Fir Nasil. Very shortly after this, the party learned that they were under attack here at the quarry, and they decided to assist the Olthoi in the matter, especially since the Olthoi don't actually want to fight whoever it is who's attacking them. So the party is like, yes, we will assist you, and the Olthoi says, no problem. Here are some skiffs, very small. They're basically the same fundamental principle as an airship, but they're only like 10 feet in diameter, and would able to get to you at your target, which the party found very confusing. But all was soon made apparent, because when they got to the surface they found out what it was that was actually threatening them and was actually attacking. There was a Nevere make frigate-class, military-grade airship hovering over them, which was firing down into the Order personnel nearby. And that's where we'll go ahead and leave this particular session.